Y'all, ever since PoE 2 came out just a few weeks ago, I feel like there's been a sort of mass hysteria going on. If you look on YouTube, look at all the videos that have been coming out. We've got the magic find problem in PoE 2. PoE 2, the magic find problem. Controversial. Win or failure? Magic find. Even Sir Gog. Build diversity is dying and magic find killed it. That's someone I never really thought I would have such a strong disagreement with. At least judging from the title, I haven't actually watched that video yet. Zizarin even made a video that I talked about previously. In this video, I want to try to get to the bottom of Magic Find in PoE 2, and I want to actually explain it to y'all who may not know so much about it, how it works, the mechanics, and how it actually operates under diminishing marginal returns, which is very important. The funny thing is, if we keep scrolling down here, after we get past all the sort of PoE 2 is over and Magic Find killed it type content, suddenly we have some other videos appear, such as this one, where we see someone actually test how increased item rarity actually works in PoE 2, and it turns out maybe it's not going to kill the game after all, because it works exactly the same as it did in PoE 1 with diminishing marginal returns. I don't know how to pronounce this person's name, so from here on, I guess I'll just call them my dear YouTuber. We keep scrolling down. Same person made another video with more data. And if we keep scrolling down through this same list of all these videos saying basically the game is in a bad state because of Magic Find, we see Slippery Jim made videos where he farmed for 16 straight days to prove that it's totally fine. It's no problem at all. And there's tons of data in this video as well as another one that he made. And these videos with actual data came out a few days before GGG came right out and stated in their last big update that it does in fact work pretty much exactly the same as in Path of Exile 1.
Well, what I will say to start with is that like the way the Magic Find formula works in PoE 2 is literally identical to how it was in PoE 1 as far as diminishing returns and everything is concerned.
Alright, and so in this video, I'd like to get to the bottom of this a little bit, explain how magic finding works, explain why it's probably not so much of a big deal or really any big deal at all whatsoever. And so I'm going to try to walk through from zero, from start to finish, explaining how it works, explaining some of the details, and then concluding with some of my final thoughts about just how bad or terrible or if it's fine or whatever. So let's start our story here. There's a person in the community who goes by Poor Fishwife on Reddit. They've been a very active PoE community member for a very long time, especially on things like this. And they posted the following Reddit post quite a while ago, 23 days ago, which basically reminded everybody that in Path of Exile 1, player increased item rarity or magic finding has special diminishing marginal returns. I'm going to explain what that means in a second. And they said, just remember, we don't really know exactly how it works yet for PoE 2. This was around probably when people were posting all these videos saying it was destroying the game, etc., etc. I think if you look at the first couple lines of this post, it largely gives you the basis of what we're going to work forward from in this video. Poor Fishwife explains, first of all, the critical question is, should a person try to get increased item rarity, magic finding stats on your character? And the answer is vehemently yes. In other words, yes, it's definitely going to help your character out. Everybody probably wants to have some increased item rarity on their character. So the question isn't, should I get some? The question is, as they exactly state, how much should one get? I'm also going to attempt to at least give a conjecture on answering this question in this video. If you stay till the end, once we get through the data, I'll put forward an initial thought on that. And so Poor Fishwife points this out that in Path of Exile 1, player increased item rarity and increased item quantity. We don't have to worry about the quantity because that doesn't exist anymore. But they use this special system, this special diminishing marginal return system. And as they pointed out really well, for example, we can take specific values. So for example, in Path of Exile, if you had 50% increased quantity of items found, let's just call this increased item rarity for PoE 2, just hypothetically assuming it works exactly the same number for number, then let's say you had 50% increased item rarity, then you might actually only get something like 1.35 times, so that's a 35% increase, actual increase in the rarity of your drops. So even though the gear says you're getting 50% increased item rarity, you might only be getting something like 35% increased item rarity. Then when you boost this to an extreme level, so we've gone from 50% increased all the way up to 200%, you might, in fact, in reality, only receive like a 1.77 times. So even though you went from 50% to 200%, which is a huge boost, and you would expect, for example, 50% to give you actually 50% more. You would expect 200% to give you actually 3 times more or 3 times better loot, when in fact you're only getting 77% more. And so here was an example graph from Path of Exile 1. Let's take a quick look at it. And again, since Jonathan said that PoE 2 rarity works exactly the same as PoE 1, I don't know if it's safe to assume that it works exactly the same as a graph like this, exactly number for number, precisely the same, but I think it's safe to say it probably is pretty darn close, if not exactly the same, like he said. So again, we're adopting data from PoE 1, so let's just assume that this works exactly the same for PoE 2 for increased item rarity. So what this would mean would be the following. If you had, for example, on the x-axis here, 50% on your gear, so 50% increased item rarity on your gear, if you come up here to the y-axis, which is actually the actual increase to the loot you're getting, you're not hitting the 50% better marker of your loot. You're actually only down here. This was the example he used in his Reddit post, 33% more, something like that. This would be 40 here, this would be 30, so let's say it's 33% more. So what does this mean? What it basically means is that your gear is lying to you. I actually kind of hate how this system works. I don't think they should do it this way. I think it's actually really stupid because it's just going to confuse lots of people, especially new players. By the way, I don't think all these YouTube videos were helping that. But anyway, y'all, if you watch my videos, I'll try to give it to you straight. That's all I can say. So if you have 50% on your gear, you're only going to get maybe around 33% actual effect from that of what you would expect to happen. Then if we go to 100% increased item rarity on gear, you're only getting a little bit more than 50%. If you go to 150%, look at how small of an increase it is from 100% increased to 150% increase. Each one of these tick marks is like a 10% increase. So even though you've got another 50% increased on your gear, you're assuming that's another 50% increase, but it's actually only like, it looks like it's slightly more than 10% increase. Going from 150% increase to 200% increased, it's not even a further 10% gain. It's a pretty small gain. And as you can see, this curve is basically flatlining so that once you get to 200, 250, 300% increased item rarity, you're basically just not really getting any real or much of any gain from those additional stats. And GGG has even talked about why this is. GGG's reason is literally that they don't want exactly what all these videos floating out there are saying, which is that every single person is forced to stack 1,000,000% rarity on gear. That's exactly what they don't want, and that's why they designed the system this way. It's kind of funny because it's literally to prevent all these videos saying PoE is dead because of Magic Find. So they literally made the system this way so that that doesn't happen, so that people don't make those videos. So if you hopefully understand how this works, again, let me just state it one more time. I know I'm beating this to death, but this is just such an important thing about this whole thing. If you take anything away from this video, if you didn't already know this is how it works, the whole point here is that the gear is in fact lying to you. You can't just look at 100%, 200% increased item rarity and assume that's how many more rares you're going to get or how much better loot you're going to get. You're going to get a fraction of that. And the more you go higher up, 200, 300% increased item rarity, a fraction of what you're thinking it's going to be if you don't know that this is how the system works. And again, the more and more you scale it up, the less and less of an impact it's going to have, to the point where once you get to 200 or 300%, it's probably not even really worth your time to stack more. Unless you are just so rich and you literally have nothing else to do in this game that it literally doesn't matter. Just get 400, 500% because your character is already strong enough. It doesn't matter. You don't care. You have nothing else to spend your money on, so you just want to stack it as high as possible. But for most people, you shouldn't really have to do that. All right, so let's get into looking at some actual data. So right now there's 4 primary data sets that have emerged. If anybody's aware of more, feel free to leave it in the comments and I'll take a look at those as well. Again, my dear YouTuber here, who put out basically 2 videos where he did a bunch of maps and tested different rarity values. And then there's also Slippery Jim, who's been around forever and also produced basically 2 data sets over the course of 2 videos. So what I've done here is over the course of those 4 videos, I've just tallied up a few of what I consider to be like core pieces of data. I looked at basically 3 things. I looked at the gold gained, I looked at the exalt increase, so the increase in how many total exalts were dropped, and also the increase in how many total chaos orbs were dropped. Let me explain quickly some of my logic here. Even though folks are tracking like a million different things, like how many scrolls of wisdom, for example, they're getting, at the end of the day, people don't really care how many scrolls of wisdom are being dropped. It is good and useful. And for those folks that want to totally nerd out on this and try to actually reverse engineer the algorithm to get exact numbers on these things, more power to you. Please do that. And I hope I see the results if somebody can actually figure that out. But I'm actually going to make maybe a bold prediction here. I could be wrong on this, but I actually don't think anybody's going to fully reverse engineer this algorithm. And so if you can't do essentially an analytical mathematical solution, which would be reverse engineering the algorithm and then essentially writing the math out on a piece of paper to try to come up with exact numbers, if you can't do that, then what do? I've actually said this before in one of my videos. If you can't do the analytical solution, you have to do the simulation. At least that's what I default to. So in this case, doing the simulation is just running maps, killing rares, and tracking the results you get. Then the question is, what numbers actually matter? Since we're never going to probably totally reverse engineer the algorithm, the numbers that matter are basically what people care about. So things like, for example, how much gold you get, how many exalted orbs you get, how many chaos orbs you get, how many divine orbs you get. Why am I not including divine orbs here? It's because the data is completely 100% unreliable, because at best there's always 1 divine orb dropped or maybe 2 divine orb drops in these data sets, and then a bunch of others will have 0 divine orb drops. So unfortunately, at this scale, you just can't really get a read on the increase or decrease of divine orbs, unfortunately. So you're going to have to basically make a gut judgment decision on what's going on here. In my opinion, the gut judgment decision should be that if you look at things that people are interested in, get a rough idea of about how much of an increase you're getting, then we can hopefully assume that divine orbs should operate roughly similarly. I would include gold on all of these, but Slippery Jim, for some reason, didn't want to track gold. I'm going to make another bold prediction here. I'm going to say that however it works out for the gold, I'm going to take a guess is going to be a pretty good predictor of the actual overall gain that increased item rarity is giving you. Because gold, I feel like it's kind of like a good proxy. This is just like a theory that I have. My theory is that gold is going to be a pretty good proxy for how much actual gain you're getting from all this stuff, but I could be wrong about that. So let me explain a little bit these videos and the results. So my dear YouTuber over here did a first test where he tested 80 tier 15 maps, and he tested it at 4 different levels of increased item rarity. So 0, 100, 200, and 300. There was also some rarity gained off of the Atlas. I guess I should talk about this for a second. This is kind of an important point. Atlas rarity, the question is, how does it affect the increased item rarity? As far as I can tell, it seems to be just probably totally multiplicative. And since it's multiplicative and on a separate axis, I think it's fair to basically just ignore this. You just want to get as much as you can. It's such a nuanced issue. Maybe I could talk about it in a future video, but probably not. I don't know. For now, let's just move on. I'm going to focus on player increased item rarity. All right. And so basically I went through this. And so if you want, you can just basically stop here and look at these results. And then I went through and I harvested out the gold that was gotten from each of these, as well as the Exalted and the Chaos Orb. And then I went over to my little spreadsheet, and you can see here's the 0 increased item rarity. Here's a 50 increased item rarity. There was one video that had 50 increased item rarity. Here's 100 increased item rarity. And so in this video, if you look at the gold gain, he got about 40% more gold and about 92% more Exalted Orbs when he had 100 increased item rarity on his character. Then he also had 200% increased item rarity. He got 29% increase in gold and 100% increase in Exalted Orbs. And at 300% increased item rarity on his character, he got 28% increased gold and 117% increase in Exalted Orb drops. And so, of course, at this point, people were basically already noticing that, yes, indeed, it does work pretty much exactly the same, it looks like, as in PoE 1, where you have this diminishing marginal return. And after you get about 100% increased item rarity, or maybe 150 or whatever it is, you get this total flatlining effect where you're just not really getting much gain after that. So if you want to just pause the video at any point and just look at this, this is all of the results put together. My dear YouTuber over here did a second test where, again, he did a bunch of maps. He did 250 tier 15 maps and tested 0, 50, 100, 200, and 300 increased item rarity this time. Again, I went through and I looked at the gain in Exalted Orbs and Chaos Orbs, and then again, I went ahead and put them over here. And we can see this diminishing marginal return effect. Now, again, because the data isn't even really quite of sufficient size, most likely, we're still not getting a perfect picture. We only have one snapshot of 50% increased item rarity on a player, and it's only showing, for example, for Exalted Orbs, it only showed an 11% increase. And for Chaos Orbs, it was actually negative, so they actually got less Chaos Orbs. Obviously, this is not what you would expect. Anyways, moving along, as you got to 100% increased item rarity, let's say around 50% of these valuable currency increase, and then again, with Chaos, negative results for the 200, 300. So all we can really do is do our best to form a judgment call based on sort of limited data and how we know that the system works, which I've already sort of explained. And then Slippery Jim came around, did a bunch of testing. So he killed 1,000 rare monsters at 0 increased item rarity and 100 increased item rarity. And then when I just did my quick calculation, it basically showed that from 0 to 100% increased item rarity, about a 20% increase in Exalted Orbs, about a 60% increase in Chaos Orbs. Then he did another absolutely insane video where, again, he killed a bajillion rares. I'm discarding him doing the rare maps. Again, if you put rarity on maps, it's known at this point. In fact, my dear put in his second video a quote from GGG where they said that map rarity is multiplicative with player rarity. So whatever is going on exactly with map rarity, whether it has diminishing marginal returns or not, it doesn't really matter for your player rarity because they're multiplied. When they're multiplied together, they're operating independently from one another. So basically, it doesn't matter from the standpoint of how much rarity should I have on my character. So from this video, it's going to be like 500 rares from 0 increased item rarity, 500 rare kills from 100, and then 500 kills with 750 increased item rarity on the character. And then I just looked at Exalted and Chaos Orbs. Maybe he used the same data. I came up with 19% and 60% again. And then for 750, it was a 47% increase for Exalted Orbs and a 40% increase for Chaos Orbs. And so these are the main data sets that we're working with at this point, and this is what we're going to have to draw our conclusions from at this point, as well as direct information from GGG, such as them saying it just works the same as it did in PoE 1, diminishing marginal returns, and then we have PoE 1 diminishing marginal return data to get an idea of how this is going to work. So let me go ahead and give you my thoughts. I think that if if you look at all these data together, if you look at all the individual values from all these things, I think if we literally were to have just looked at the original post that poor Fishwife posted, I think that it basically gives you a pretty good rough estimate picture of what exactly is going on here. They themselves said it works exactly the same as in PoE 1. Here's some old data from PoE 1, and I think it's probably on some kind of a similar or maybe exactly the same line as something like this. So if we look here, for example, around 50%, we should expect maybe around 50%. Now, we only had one data point for PoE 2. It didn't really show much of an increase. I'm going to say it probably just wasn't a good enough sample size. We know that 50% should give you the most bang for your buck, that first 50%. Then when we got out here to about 100% increased in PoE 1, we were looking at about a 50 to 60% increase in PoE 1 was how this translated. If we go back, we had a whole bunch of these results with 100% increased item rarity. And if we look, we see values that seem to basically average out to around probably 50%-ish. So maybe we can make a rough estimate that 100 increased item rarity maybe is a 50%-ish gain, same as in PoE 1. And then when we go to 200%, we have the two separate videos giving us data. And for Exalted Orbs, which really Exalted Orbs I feel like are probably going to paint the better picture, we've got basically an increase from 92% to 100% and from 46 to 86%. And then when we go from 200 to 300, we see that the numbers are basically, they're just not really changing a lot from 200 to 300. Of course, if we go back to this graph, do the numbers change a lot from 200 to 300? When we go and look at these old results from PoE 1, we see that at 200% increase, we're here, and at 300% we're here. So this is about a 10% gain after it's already been boosted quite a bit. And so it would be, in theory, kind of a negligible difference from 200% to about 300%. That difference is relatively negligible. And that's basically what we saw in the data. So if we want to start talking about a sweet spot of where you should actually aim for your character, I think we can safely set a hard limit at 200% increased item rarity. Going from 200 to 250 is going to be probably pretty expensive if you want to have pretty good gear, I'm guessing. I don't know the exact values. But for example, on my character, I put together about 200% increased item rarity, and it was really cheap. The gear is not that great, but it was still really cheap, and I had high life and high res rolls on all my gear, and I got up to 200% increased rarity with no problem whatsoever. The gear just didn't have great defense rolls is all. But of course, once you've gone to 200%, from 150 to 200, once again, you're just not really getting a huge gain. And again, if we go back one more time and look at this, if you were to just take my deer's videos alone, his results from going from 100 increased item rarity to 200 increased item rarity were mixed. But in a second video, it did show a pretty big increase. It was basically doubling the increase. So it basically went from about 50% increased Exalted Orbs to almost 100%. So what should you aim for with your character? The first thing you have to do is you have to think about how strong is your overall character build. If you're playing a straight up weak build, you can't really help the fact that you're not going to be able to squeeze as much increased item rarity in on your character. That's just a fact of the universe. You need to just accept that. But given that up to probably around 50% at least increased item rarity, I think we can probably set a minimum bar around 50% increased item rarity. Maybe nobody should ever make a build that's below this 50% point, since it's almost like a straight line. And then from 50 to 100, I still think this is quite significant enough that I would almost go ahead and say maybe 100% is our minimum point here. Where if you're going to make a build, if you can't squeeze in 100%, maybe you need to rethink your build. Then from 100, I would say to 200, it looks like we're getting pretty extreme diminishing marginal returns kicking in. And again, this is exactly what played out in our PoE2 data. 100% was a huge boost, and then 200 and 300 was negligible. 50 to 100 was also a huge boost. Jim only tested 100, and well, it was a large boost. I'm going to go ahead and say 100% increased item rarity is what I'm going to set as my minimum bar. If you just look on PoE Trade, there's helms with 50% increased item rarity that are pretty cheap, I think. So that's going to be my call. 100% is minimum. I'm going to say 200% is your maximum if you're not a super hardcore player. So I'm going to say 100 to 200, somewhere in there is our sweet spot. Then you're going to basically look at your individual build, your individual character strength, and you're going to have to make a call between 100 to 200. Where do you want to end up landing? Maybe you go on PoE Trade, you have this as a general sweet spot, 100 to 200%. Go see what gear you can find, shoot for as high as you can get, and then once you land safely, comfortably in somewhere in this 100 to 200, and if you feel, ooh, I really want to have a lot, then maybe try to get 150 to 200 range, or even around 200 or even a little bit over 200, and then basically just stop at that point and don't worry about it. All right, and I'll conclude with a couple final points. Poor Fishwife, this very active community member who seems to always know exactly what they're talking about with all these things, also made a post on another Reddit thread about some of these data videos, and I want to talk about one thing that was said in this post. He said basically these special diminishing returns for player MF exist for good reason. Back in PoE 1, GGG stated that their rationale was to make these returns exist so that players wouldn't feel like they must stack player rarity, magic find, etc. on gear to extreme values. But as he states, there's no similar worry about area magic finding or monster magic finding. So for example, if you kill a rare with a bunch of stats on it, there's no similar worry because they want to incentivize that behavior in the game. As he says, they always wanted higher difficulty to equal better reward. If you stack the diminishing marginal returns on things like more difficult monsters, or for example, on the map that you roll to get rarity on the map itself, if they had the same crazy diminishing marginal returns, then it wouldn't really be ever worth your time to do this more difficult content. So they don't want to have it be that way. So they want to have it where your character doesn't really need to feel like you have to stack a ton of magic finding, but you do want to feel incentivized and get huge results from area magic find, rarity, and monster buffs and different things that make them drop more loot. All right, so go ahead and use this information to think about what kind of sweet spot you want to hit on your character. And then once you're done with that, just remember that for things like rolling rarity on maps, just the more the better. You just go crazy, go to town, it doesn't matter. Those things are multiplied against the diminishing player rarities. This is exactly how it worked in PoE 1. This is probably going to be exactly how it worked in PoE 2. And then I want to end with one final point about this whole magic finding debate, which is the following. If we go back and end this video where we began with all these, I don't know, fear mongering or again, mass hysteria, let's chalk it up to people not sleeping in the first couple weeks of the game coming out. How about that? Because I respect a lot of these people. If you look, one of the main arguments is always about build diversity. One of the things that people constantly argue for the problem with Magic Find is that it forces you to have the stat on your gear and it kills the build diversity. I don't think that Magic Finding is the culprit. I think the culprit is the fact that the builds themselves are just bad and some of them are overpowered. When you have builds that just feel totally overpowered, instantly kill the entire screen, one-shot bosses, and then you compare it to builds that are just terrible because the skill kind of sucks, or maybe something about that defense layer is just terrible, maybe the clear speed is terrible. I think that's actually the problem here. So I think people are kind of conflating the issue of Magic Find with the actual problem of the builds just being totally in different leagues of power. And just because you see different builds taking up the majority of all the builds in the game, and then you have this tail where most people don't play any of these other classes. Y'all, isn't that pretty much exactly how it's worked for every game that's ever come out recently? And also for all of Path of Exile 1, where it's usually always dominated by a specific class? Magic Finding doesn't have anything to do with that. So I think it's really weird that people are trying to make this connection between these two things. And I'll throw out one final point, which is that what about resistances on gear? Why aren't people complaining? Oh my God, resistances are mandatory, you guys. We can't have mandatory stats. Well, Path of Exile has always had mandatory resistance, cold, lightning, and fire res. It's mandatory that those resistances have to be capped. That's how the game works in Path of Exile. So why aren't people complaining about those being mandatory stats? The game is dead, you guys, because those are mandatory stats. And that's what's killing build diversity, is because you have all these mandatory stats like cold res. If you play an OP build, you don't have to worry about the cold res or something like that. If you play an OP build, you have more room to get cold res, which is a mandatory stat. I don't think it actually logically checks out. And I'll end the video with that. Hit the video with a like or even possibly a subscribe. If you liked it, let me know what you think in the comments. I'll be interested to see what feedback I get on this one. And for now, I think for me, it's going to be case closed on Magic Finding until a huge amounts of more data or some big revelation of somebody totally figuring out exactly how the algorithm works. For now, my position will be exactly what I laid out in this video, and I'll probably just shoot to have as much Magic Find as I can on my character, knowing that after around 200, it probably doesn't make much of a difference. All right, take care, y'all. See you in the next one.